Doubt rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It comes like a polite visitor with clean hands and a calm voice, the kind you almost trust because it sounds reasonable. It sits down beside your decision, not to attack it directly, but to reopen it, just a little, like lifting the corner of a sealed envelope to check something. And once that corner is lifted, your mind remembers the feel of the paper giving way. It remembers how easy it is to unseal what you worked so hard to close. Most people think they doubt because they don't know enough. But the loop doesn't run on missing information. It runs on a deeper hunger. The hunger for safety disguised as the hunger for certainty. You tell yourself you're being careful, responsible, intelligent. Yet the sensation underneath is not intellectual at all. It's bodily. It's the subtle tightening in the chest when you imagine picking one door and realizing later you should have chosen the other. It's the quiet terror of being the author of your own consequences. There's a reason doubt feels like a moral duty. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that confidence is arrogance and decisiveness is recklessness. We learned to treat hesitation as humility. So the mind, trying to be good, keeps returning to the scene of the choice like a priest to a confession. Did I do it right? Did I miss a sign? Did I overlook someone's needs? Did I misread the room? Doubt becomes a ritual of self-surveillance, a way to prove you are not careless with life. But the loop has its own psychology, and it's more precise than it first appears. The moment you decide, you create a boundary. You separate what could have been from what will now be. A boundary is powerful, and power triggers an ancient response in the nervous system. Boundaries mean exclusion. Exclusion means loss. Loss means grief. And grief, especially pre-grief, the grief of paths you will never walk, can feel like danger. So the mind tries to soften that danger by refusing to fully accept the boundary. It keeps the other doors emotionally unlocked. It says, we can still go back. It says, nothing is final. It says, let's just keep reviewing. And in that review, it offers you a counterfeit comfort, the feeling that you haven't fully lost anything yet because you haven't truly committed. This is how the doubt loop becomes addictive. It grants you a small dose of relief. You don't have to face the finality of your own choice. But the price is constant mental friction. Your energy leaks away in invisible negotiations with yourself. And what looks like thinking is often just self-protection wearing the mask of analysis. Notice how the loop speaks. It rarely says, I'm afraid. It says, what if? What if I'm wrong? What if this damages my future? What if people judge me? What if I regret it? What if is the mind's way of living in a hypothetical afterlife, a place where no decision is ever completely born and therefore none can ever fully die. At the center of the loop is a quiet myth your brain tells itself, that there exists a perfect decision, and if you could just find it, you could bypass pain. This is the dream of painless adulthood. It's a seductive dream because it suggests that the universe is a puzzle and you are only one correct solution away from peace. But real decisions aren't math problems. They are initiations. They do not remove uncertainty. They move you through it. When you understand that, something shifts. Doubt is no longer just a flaw in your confidence. It becomes a signal about your relationship with uncertainty and responsibility. There's another mechanism that feeds the loop, and it's blunt. The mind confuses discomfort with error. If you choose something meaningful, you will feel discomfort. The body registers change as threat before it registers it as growth. New commitments alter your identity. They rearrange your routines, your social dynamics, your future story. That internal rearranging creates friction, and the mind, desperate to interpret friction, often concludes, this feels bad, so it must be wrong. But discomfort is not evidence of a wrong decision. Often, it's evidence of a real decision. Then, there's the social dimension. Humans are tribal beings. Long ago, belonging was survival. So your nervous system still keeps one ear tuned to the invisible crowd. Even when you are alone, the crowd is there in your imagination. The people who might disapprove, the people you want to impress, the people whose love feels conditional. Doubt becomes a way of trying to preempt rejection. If I keep questioning myself, maybe I can anticipate their objections. Maybe I can craft a version of my choice that no one can criticize. But this is an impossible task. The crowd is never satisfied because the crowd is not a single mind. It is a shifting storm of preferences. And the more you try to appease it, the more your inner authority dissolves. Eventually, your decisions stop feeling like your own. They feel like a committee outcome, messy and compromised. Now add one more ingredient: regret. Regret is not just a feeling. It's a story about responsibility. People fear regret because they fear the sentence hidden inside it. I should have known. Regret implies a future self looking back with contempt. So the mind tries to avoid regret by trying to see the future in advance. It runs simulations. It rehearses disasters. It uses imagination as a surveillance system. Yet you cannot outthink regret, because regret doesn't come only from bad decisions. It also comes from good decisions that carried unavoidable loss. Sometimes you choose the healthier path and still mourn what it cost. Sometimes you choose the brave path and still grieve the comfort you left behind. If you demand a decision that guarantees no regret, you are demanding an adult life without sacrifice. And sacrifice is the entry fee for meaning. So the doubt loop persists not because you're weak, but because your mind is trying to protect you from the most intimate risk there is, being the one who chose. There's a subtle, almost mystical irony here. Doubt pretends to keep you safe, but chronically doubting yourself creates a different danger, a life where you can't trust your own signal. And when you can't trust your own signal, you become easier to steer. By trends, by pressure, by the loudest voice in the room, by the oldest wound in your memory. Doubt becomes a kind of inner exile, a way of stepping back from the throne of your own life. And this is where the esoteric lens becomes useful, not as fantasy, but as metaphor sharp enough to cut through excuses. Imagine your inner world as a temple, not a modern self-help studio, but a temple built of memory, instinct, desire, fear, and the sacred rawness of being human. In the center of that temple is a seat, an authority seat. The part of you that decides. The part of you that signs your name to your actions. The part of you that can say, "This is my choice," and mean it. When doubt loops endlessly, that seat is never occupied for long. Something else keeps sitting there. Sometimes it's the part of you that wants everyone to like you. Sometimes it's the part that believes you must be perfect to be safe. Sometimes it's the part that learned early that making a wrong move leads to punishment. These parts are not evil. They are protective, but they're not meant to rule. They are meant to advise. The loop happens when advisors overthrow the judge. And notice the timing. Doubt often spikes after you decide, not before. Before, you may feel relatively clear. But once the decision is made, the mind returns with new questions, as if it suddenly discovered new evidence. This is not always new evidence. Often it's your psyche reacting to the identity shift. The choice has been made. Now you must become the person who made it. That is the moment the old self tries to pull you back. Not because the decision is wrong, but because the decision is real. You can feel this in small things. You send an important message and then reread it 10 times, imagining alternate phrasings, imagining the recipient's reaction. You agree to a plan and then immediately start fantasizing about canceling. You commit to a project and then suddenly question whether you're capable. In each case, the loop is doing the same thing. Try to restore the sensation of open options because open options feel like control. But open options are not control. They are postponement. Control is the ability to move forward even while uncertainty breathes at your neck. If you want to stop doubting your decisions, you must name what doubt truly is in your system. Sometimes it's anxiety trying to negotiate with fate. Sometimes it's an old trauma response scanning for danger. Sometimes it's perfectionism demanding a guarantee life cannot provide. Sometimes it's a learned habit from environments where your choices were constantly questioned, so you internalize the interrogator. And the moment you name it, you weaken the spell. Because the doubt loop thrives on vagueness. It loves fog. It loves endless maybe. It dissolves when you bring it into clear light and say, this is not wisdom. This is fear dressed up as wisdom. That clarity is not yet the final cure, but it is the first crack in the loop's armor. Because you begin to recognize the difference between a decision that needs genuine reconsideration and a decision that is being harassed by your nervous system. You begin to hear the tone of your own mind. You begin to notice that the loop doesn't actually produce better choices. It produces fatigue. It produces self-distrust. It produces a life of half-commitments. And somewhere deep inside you, quieter than the doubt, there's a different sensation. It's not loud. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg. It's the feeling of inner finality, the ability to close the envelope, seal it, and walk away from the mailbox without turning back to check if you wrote the address correctly. That sensation is not force. It is authority. You don't need more information to access it. You need a different inner structure, a different inner court, a place where evidence is heard, where fear is acknowledged, where intuition is allowed to speak, and where a verdict is rendered and then honored. The doubt loop is the sign that your inner authority has been left unguarded. The good news is that anything left unguarded can be reclaimed. But reclamation requires ceremony, not in the superficial sense, but in the deep psychological sense, a deliberate transition from endless questioning into rightful judgment. Because a decision is not just a choice. It is a claim. It is you telling reality, this is the path I will walk, and telling your mind, you may advise me, but you may not dissolve me. And when you are ready, the inner temple opens further, and you will meet the part of you that knows how to weigh things, not endlessly, not nervously, but with a calm, almost ancient precision. The part that can hold uncertainty without worshiping it. The part that can say, enough. The scale is balanced. The verdict stands. And then the temple opens further, exactly as promised, not with a burst of light, but with that quiet click you feel when a lock finally turns. The same mind that has been pacing in circles begins to recognize a different architecture. There's a chamber behind the doubt, an older chamber, where choices are not dragged through endless what if, but weighed, witnessed, and sealed. In the old stories, Thoth is not the one who rages or pleads. He doesn't storm the throne. He doesn't threaten you into certainty. He appears the way true authority often appears, calm, precise, almost unsettlingly neutral. A presence that doesn't need to raise its voice because it doesn't need permission to exist. He is the scribe of the gods, the keeper of measures, the one who records what is true even when you would prefer something softer. In the hall of judgment, when the heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, it is not Thoth's job to flatter the heart. It is his job to witness the result. Now bring that myth closer until it stops being a story and becomes a mirror. Because inside you, there is also a hall. You can feel it when a decision matters, when the stakes are not just what should I eat, but who am I becoming? The air gets heavier. Time seems to slow. The mind starts gathering arguments like scrolls. The body starts sending signals like messengers. And somewhere, behind your everyday thoughts, a court assembles. Most people don't realize they have an inner court. They only feel the chaos of it. They experience the shouting, the interruptions, the sudden reversals. They think they are overthinking when what they're really experiencing is a courtroom with no judge, where every witness believes they're the law. So let's name the players, not as a list, but as living forces you have felt in your own skin. There's the anxious witness, the one who speaks in urgent futures. It doesn't offer evidence, it offers images. You'll fail. You'll be judged. You'll lose something you can't replace. This witness is not lying, it's scanning. It learned, somewhere, that surprises hurt, so it tries to eliminate surprise by imagining every disaster first. In the court, it always arrives early, breathless, convinced that the case is life or death. Then there's the rational advocate, polished and articulate, who makes clean arguments and hates ambiguity. This one loves research, frameworks, pros and cons, optimization. It can be brilliant. It can also be cowardly in an elegant way, because it will keep requesting more data long after the decision has stopped being about data. It will pretend the verdict is still pending because it fears what comes after the verdict. Action. Then there's the wounded witness, quieter, not always verbal, speaking through your throat tightening, your stomach clenching, the sudden fatigue that washes over you when you try to commit. This witness carries history. It remembers moments when choosing wrong meant humiliation, punishment, abandonment, or shame. It doesn't debate. It flinches. And then there's the intuitive witness, the one people romanticize but rarely respect. Intuition doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It arrives as a simple knowing, often without explanation. A subtle yes in the chest, a clean no in the gut, a calm sense of direction that feels almost too plain to trust. Many people ignore it because it doesn't come with footnotes. But in a true court, intuition is not dismissed for lacking a spreadsheet. It is examined for consistency, not for drama. When you doubt endlessly, it's because these witnesses are talking over one another and no one is recording the testimony in a way that creates closure. This is where the Thoth archetype becomes practical. Thoth is not there to decide for you. He is there to restore the order of the court. He is there to make sure every voice is heard in the right sequence. And then, crucially, that the verdict is written in ink. Because what isn't written gets relitigated. You can feel this in your own life. The decisions you suffer over are often the ones you never truly documented internally. You kind of decided, you almost committed, you think you know, but you didn't carve the verdict into your own mind. So the case stays open. And anytime you feel discomfort, anytime someone questions you, anytime uncertainty breathes near you, the whole trial restarts from the beginning. A sealed decision requires something your modern world rarely teaches: internal due process. Imagine, for a moment, that you're stepping into that hall intentionally. Not to be dramatic, but to be honest. The floor is cool stone. The ceiling is high enough that your thoughts echo. There is a scale in the center. Not a scale that measures money or productivity, but a scale that measures truth as it relates to your life. And beside it, a scribe waits with a reed pen. Your future is not begging you to be perfect. It's asking you to be clear. Here's what changes when you enter the hall on purpose. You stop treating doubt as an emergency, and you start treating it as testimony. Doubt becomes one witness, not the whole court. So you let the anxious witness speak first, because if you don't, it will interrupt everyone else. You let it pour out its worst-case visions. You don't argue with it yet. You simply let it speak until it runs out of breath. And you notice something startling. Once it's heard, it becomes less feral. Anxiety is often amplified by being ignored. When it's allowed to testify, it becomes more specific. It stops being a fog and starts being a set of claims. Then you turn to the rational advocate. You let it present its evidence. What do you know? What do you not know? What is actually probable, not just possible? Rationality is not the enemy. The problem is when rationality becomes an infinite delaying tactic. In the inner court, the rational advocate has a time limit. It must present what matters, not what flatters its own intelligence. Then you invite the body, the wounded witness, to speak in its own language. You ask, without forcing, what part of this feels dangerous and why? Sometimes you discover the decision itself is not what terrifies you. It's the meaning you attach to it. If I choose this, I'm trapped. If I choose that, I'm selfish. If I commit here, I'll be abandoned. The body reveals the myth hidden underneath the choice, the old story trying to write your future. And then, finally, you let intuition speak, not as a mystical lottery ticket, but as a pattern recognition intelligence that has been watching your life longer than your latest spreadsheet has. Intuition often knows what aligns with your values before you can articulate your values. It often knows what drains you before you can admit you're drained. In the hall, intuition is asked one simple question. If no one could judge you, what would you choose? When these testimonies are gathered, most people rush to a verdict too quickly, or they avoid a verdict entirely. The Thoth approach is different. It introduces the feather. Ma'at is not just truth in a moralistic sense. It's order, rightness, the alignment of your inner world with reality. The feather is light, but it is not weak. It doesn't bully the heart, it reveals the heart. And in a psychological sense, the feather is your core principle, one or two values that, when honored, let you sleep at night. Not values that impress others, but values that settle your nervous system because they feel like you. This is where the scale becomes ruthless in the best way. Because when you place a decision on the scale, you are not asking, will this make everyone happy? You're asking, does this align me with my own center? Does it move me toward integrity or toward performance? Does it reduce my life into fear management, or does it expand my life into meaning? A strange thing happens when you weigh your options like this. The mind stops chasing the perfect outcome and starts looking for the clean outcome. Not clean in the sense of easy, but clean in the sense of internally coherent. You begin to recognize that some decisions feel complicated because they are complicated, and some decisions feel complicated because you're trying to make them serve conflicting identities at once. The inner court exposes that conflict, and now we arrive at the part people avoid, the judge. In the Egyptian hall, the verdict is not decided by the loudest witness. The verdict emerges from the weighing, and then it is recorded. In your inner hall, the judge is not a tyrant. The judge is the part of you that can tolerate the discomfort of finality. The part that can disappoint someone and survive it. The part that can choose without demanding a guarantee from the universe. In modern psychology, you might call it the integrated adult self, the executive function that can hold competing inputs and still commit. In esoteric language, you might call it inner sovereignty. But call it whatever you like, the sensation is the same. It feels like standing upright inside yourself. This is the moment where Thoth's presence matters most. Because the scribe does something the anxious mind hates. He writes the verdict as if it counts. And when it's written, something in you shifts. The decision stops being a debate and becomes a document. It becomes a line you can return to when the doubt tries to restart the trial. You can feel how powerful this is. Because the next time you waver, you're no longer negotiating from scratch. You are consulting a record. I already held court, you tell yourself. I heard the witnesses. I weighed the feather. I rendered a verdict. I am not reopening the case because I feel uncomfortable today. That doesn't make you rigid. It makes you reliable. Of course, sometimes a case should reopen. Sometimes new information arrives. Sometimes reality changes. But reopening a case should be a formal act, not a nervous reflex. The inner court teaches you the difference between wisdom and panic. Wisdom says, we have new evidence. Panic says, I don't like how this feels, so the decision must be wrong. And here's the final piece, the quiet grandeur hidden in this whole ritual. When you treat your decisions with this kind of dignity, you stop behaving like your life is a series of accidental outcomes. You start behaving like your life is authored, not controlled. Authored. Authorship means you accept that any meaningful choice will include loss. It means you accept that you cannot save every version of yourself. It means you accept that the feather will not always favor comfort, but it will favor alignment. And alignment is what produces the rarest kind of peace. Not the peace of certainty, but the peace of integrity. So the court closes. The hall grows quiet. The scribe sets down the pen. The verdict stands, not because the future is guaranteed, but because you have restored the rightful order inside yourself. And as you leave the chamber, you can already sense the next mystery waiting beyond the door. If you have an inner court, then you also have an inner language, a way the psyche communicates through signs and symbols. A way decisions stop feeling like guesses and start feeling like inevitabilities. Because once the verdict is written, the world begins to speak back, not always loudly, but in patterns, in echoes, in the strange clarity of what suddenly makes sense. Once the verdict is written, the world begins to speak back, not always with words, but with echoes. You start noticing that the mind doesn't actually live in logic alone. It lives in meaning. It lives in symbols. It lives in tiny internal pictures that carry entire histories. And this is the strange thing most people miss. You can have the correct facts and still feel lost, because facts do not create inner authority. Meaning does. Thoth, in the old imagination, is not merely a judge's clerk. He is the keeper of glyphs, the one who turns the invisible into something legible, the one who takes a chaotic cloud of experience and presses it into form. And if you listen carefully, you can feel why that matters for decisions. A decision becomes stable when it has a stable symbol inside you, when your choice stops being a shifting argument and becomes a clear sign you can recognize even in darkness. Most doubt is not the absence of intelligence. It is the absence of a personal symbol strong enough to anchor you. Without that anchor, your mind keeps drifting between competing interpretations of what you're doing. 1 hour the decision feels like freedom. The next hour it feels like a trap. The same choice, 2 different meanings. And meaning is what the nervous system obeys. This is why someone can be wildly capable and still second-guess everything. Because capability answers, can I? But symbolism answers, what does this mean about me? And the mind is obsessed with that question. It's not just choosing an option. It's choosing an identity. It's choosing a story. It's choosing a place in the invisible social cosmos. So when I say glyph thinking, I mean this. The inner authority code is not a longer list of pros and cons. It is the ability to translate a decision into a symbol that aligns your psyche, so the decision becomes internally undeniable. Not because it's perfect, but because it's coherent with who you are and who you are becoming. Think of how quickly a symbol can reorganize you. A wedding ring is just metal, yet it changes behavior, posture, priorities. A uniform is just fabric, yet it changes the way you walk into a room. A flag is just color, yet it can make the heart swell or rage. The brain is not foolish for responding to symbols. It is built that way. Symbols are compression. They carry huge amounts of meaning in a small container, which is exactly what the human mind requires to navigate a world too complex to compute in full. Your decisions need that compression. If they remain only arguments, they remain vulnerable. Arguments can always be countered, but a symbol, when it is true, doesn't argue. It simply stands. Here is the problem. Most people let their symbols be chosen for them. They inherit them from parents, culture, old wounds, online noise. They absorb a symbol of success that is actually someone else's hunger. They absorb a symbol of love that is actually fear of abandonment. They absorb a symbol of worth that is actually performance. And then they wonder why their decisions never feel solid. It's because they're trying to build authority on borrowed glyphs. Thoth's code, psychologically speaking, begins when you stop borrowing your meaning. It helps to picture the inner temple again, but this time you move past the courtroom and into a quieter room lined with inscriptions. Not laws carved to punish you, symbols carved to orient you. The moment you enter, you feel it. The mind relaxes when it encounters order that makes sense. Not forced order, true order. The kind that feels like alignment rather than control. In that room, your decision isn't asked to justify itself endlessly. It's asked to reveal its true meaning. And the first question you learn to ask is almost disarmingly simple. What is the core pattern here? Because every major decision sits inside a repeating pattern. You're never choosing in isolation. You're choosing in the context of your habits, your relationships, your histories. The doubt loop often persists because you treat the decision as a one-time event instead of recognizing it as a continuation of a long story. When you recognize the story, clarity sharpens. Maybe the pattern is that you always choose what pleases others and then resent it later. Maybe the pattern is that you delay until urgency forces you, and then you call it fate. Maybe the pattern is that you chase intensity and confuse it with destiny. Maybe the pattern is that you avoid visibility because visibility once meant danger. When you see the pattern, the decision stops being a foggy question mark and becomes a precise fork in the road. Am I repeating the old glyph or inscribing a new one? This is where the grandeur returns, not the grandeur of fantasy, but the grandeur of responsibility. Because to inscribe a new glyph is to break an old spell. Let's make it concrete. You are considering taking a job, leaving a relationship, starting a project, moving to a new place, committing to a discipline. Your mind argues in circles. But beneath the argument, there's a symbol already trying to form. The symbol might be door, bridge, anchor, cage, flame, oath. You can feel it if you stop forcing logic and let the psyche speak in its native language. And here is the key. You don't pick a symbol because it sounds poetic. You discover the symbol because it tells the truth about how your nervous system interprets the choice. If the decision feels like an anchor, ask yourself why. Does it anchor you to stability you need, or does it anchor you to an identity you've outgrown? If it feels like a bridge, ask what you're leaving behind and what you're willing to become. If it feels like a cage, is it truly a cage, or is it the healthy boundary your impulsive part hates? The symbol reveals the psychological stakes with far more honesty than your polite rationalizations do. Once you have the symbol, you can do something powerful. You can test it against the feather. Because not every symbol that feels intense is aligned. Trauma can make a cage feel like home. People-pleasing can make a prison feel like safety. Addiction can make a fire feel like love. This is why glyph thinking is not daydreaming. It is disciplined meaning-making. It's the ability to ask with real precision. Does this symbol serve my integrity, or does it serve my old survival strategies? When the symbol is aligned, something changes. Your decision begins to feel inevitable, not because the future is guaranteed, but because the meaning is coherent. There's a psychological reason inevitability feels so different from certainty. Certainty tries to eliminate the unknown. Inevitability accepts the unknown and still moves. It's the feeling of a river that doesn't know every stone ahead, yet still flows because it knows its direction. In practical terms, inevitability appears when you can name the decision in one sentence that feels clean in your body. Not a slogan to impress people, but a sentence that, when spoken, makes your shoulders drop slightly, makes your breathing deepen. That bodily response is not magic. It is the nervous system recognizing coherence. You might say, quietly, I choose what expands my integrity, or I choose what ends a pattern, or I choose the path that makes me more honest. These sentences are not motivational. They're glyphs, compact codes that the psyche can follow when the mind starts to spiral. And then comes the second part of glyph thinking, the part Thoth would insist on: inscription. A glyph that stays vague won't protect you when pressure rises. It must be written somewhere inside you with enough clarity that you can return to it. In ancient terms, you carve it. In modern terms, you establish a personal doctrine for that decision. A few lines you will not negotiate away when you're tired, when you're lonely, when someone doubts you. This is not stubbornness. This is self-trust. Because the moment you choose, the world will test your meaning. People will offer their interpretations. Your own fear will offer its interpretations. Random events will happen, and the mind will try to assign them as omens. Without inscription, you'll be tossed by every new interpretation like a small boat without a keel. With inscription, you can say, I know what this means. And because I know what it means, I know what to do next. This is where many people misunderstand spirituality. They think signs come from outside like cosmic breadcrumbs. But a large part of what you call a sign is simply your perception reorganizing around a committed meaning. When you decide with integrity, you become able to see congruence and incongruence more clearly. Not because the universe suddenly starts shouting at you, but because your inner world stops contradicting itself. You begin to notice what supports the glyph and what corrodes it. A conversation feels off because it violates your meaning. An opportunity feels clean because it matches the direction. A habit feels disgusting because it belongs to the old pattern. And because you have a symbol, your psyche can sort experience faster. This reduces doubt dramatically, not by force, but by structure. Still, there is a trap here, and it's subtle. The mind can turn glyphs into superstition. It can start hunting for external confirmation to avoid the responsibility of inner judgment. A certain number appears, a coincidence happens, and the mind says, "See, it's a sign." That can be comforting, but it can also be another way of outsourcing authority. Thoth's code doesn't outsource. It clarifies. So the mature version of glyph thinking is this. You use symbols to reveal your inner truth, not to avoid it. You don't ask, "Is the universe giving me permission?" You ask, "What meaning have I chosen to live by?" And then you watch reality, not for permission, but for feedback. Feedback is not the same as approval. Feedback is reality's way of keeping you honest. When you live like this, decisions stop being fragile. They become part of an internal language you can trust. And the more you trust that language, the less you need to ruminate, because your psyche knows how to orient itself. But there is one more reason doubt returns even after you find your symbol. It returns when something inside you benefits from the old instability, when a shadow part, an inner contract you never signed consciously, prefers confusion because confusion keeps you small, keeps you safe, keeps you unaccountable, keeps you available to others' demands. And that is the next threshold, because once you start inscribing your own glyphs, you attract resistance, not just from people, but from the parts of you that learn to survive by giving up authorship. The moment your inner authority strengthens, those parts will try to impersonate wisdom again. They'll whisper, "Be careful." They'll whisper, "Don't be selfish." They'll whisper, "You're not ready." Not because they hate you, but because they're afraid of what happens when you stop asking for permission. So the temple opens again, deeper now, and you begin to see the real enemy of inner authority. Not uncertainty, but authority theft. The subtle forces that hijack your will while calling it virtue. So the temple opens again, deeper now, and you begin to see the real enemy of inner authority. Not uncertainty, but theft. Not a dramatic theft with breaking glass and alarms, but the quiet kind that happens in daylight when you're looking right at it and still don't name it. Authority theft is what happens when something inside you takes the seat of judgment and pretends it's you. You can recognize it by one signature sensation. You make a choice, and it doesn't feel like ownership. It feels like compliance, or performance, or avoidance. You might still get what you want on paper, but inside, the decision feels borrowed, thin, unstable, like a garment you're wearing for someone else's eyes. The shadows that steal authority don't announce themselves as shadows. They present themselves as virtues. They say they are responsibility. They say they are kindness. They say they are prudence. And sometimes they are, but sometimes they're older survival codes masquerading as ethics, because that disguise is the only way they can keep operating without being questioned. The first thief is the most socially rewarded one, people-pleasing. It doesn't call itself fear. It calls itself being considerate. It calls itself being mature. It calls itself not wanting conflict. But underneath, people-pleasing is a contract with the crowd. I will trade my authorship for your approval, and in return you will not abandon me. That's the deal. And like many hidden deals, it was first made when you were too young to negotiate fairly. If you grew up in an environment where love felt conditional, where moods were unpredictable, where being easy was safer than being true, you learned a skill. Reading rooms, anticipating needs, adjusting yourself. That skill can make you successful. It can also make you disappear, because people-pleasing doesn't just influence your decisions, it decides for you. It selects the option that minimizes social friction, not the option that maximizes inner alignment. And when you choose like that, doubt never ends because you can't settle into the decision. Your nervous system knows the truth. You didn't choose, you complied. So a part of you keeps protesting. It keeps reopening the case. It keeps whispering, this isn't ours. The second thief wears a sharper suit, perfectionism. Perfectionism doesn't say, I'm scared. It says, we just need to do this right. It frames itself as excellence. But perfectionism is often an attempt to purchase immunity. If I do it perfectly, I can't be criticized. If I choose perfectly, I can't be blamed. If I become flawless, I can't be rejected. And it's a trap because the goal is not achievable, but the effort is endlessly consuming. Perfectionism creates a permanent delay in your life because there is always one more variable, one more angle, one more improvement. It keeps you at the threshold, rehearsing, refining, waiting, while time moves forward without you. In the inner court, perfectionism is a clever attorney who keeps filing motions to postpone the verdict. It claims it's protecting you, but what it's protecting is an identity. The identity of someone who never has to risk being seen as wrong. And notice how perfectionism feels in the body. It often feels like tightness behind the eyes, a buzzing in the skull, a kind of restless vigilance. It can feel like pride, but it's not pride. It's hypervigilance dressed up as discipline. Then comes the third thief, quieter and more ancient, the trauma script. Trauma scripts don't always come from big events. They can come from repeated small humiliations, persistent invalidation, environments where your preferences were mocked or where your mistakes were punished harshly. The trauma script writes a simple law into your nervous system. Choosing is dangerous. So you learn to avoid choosing. Or you choose only when forced. Or you choose what keeps you invisible. Or you choose what keeps you in control. Trauma scripts are not irrational. They are protective codes written by experience. The issue is that the environment may have changed, but the code remains. This is why someone can be safe now and still feel danger in decisions. The body doesn't update by logic. It updates by repeated experiences of safety while acting. If the trauma script is driving, your decisions will feel haunted because they're being made by a past version of you trying to prevent a past pain from happening again. Now, there's another thief most people don't recognize because it feels spiritual, fate outsourcing. This is when you stop making decisions and call it trusting the universe. It can sound enlightened. It can also be avoidance. There is a difference between surrender and abdication. Surrender is when you decide with integrity and then release control of outcomes. Abdication is when you refuse to decide so you can avoid accountability. Fate outsourcing sounds like, if it's meant to be, it will happen. But listen closely and you'll often hear the subtext. If I don't choose, I can't be wrong. This thief is especially seductive for people drawn to mysticism because it feels elegant. It turns your indecision into a philosophy. But Thoth's presence cuts through it. The scribe does not accept spiritual language as an excuse for inner cowardice. The gods may shape the winds, but you still steer the vessel. Another thief is more modern and more brutal: identity addiction. You become attached to an identity that depends on doubt. The identity of the thoughtful one, the cautious one, the one who always sees every side, the one who doesn't rush. At first, this seems virtuous, and it can be, but it can also become a way to avoid committing to anything that might challenge the identity itself. If you decide boldly and it fails, what does that say about you? If you commit and it costs you, what does that say? If you choose and someone disapproves, what does that mean? Identity addiction clings to the version of you that feels safest to perform, and doubt becomes the costume that protects that performance. You can hear it in the inner dialogue. It doesn't sound like fear. It sounds like sophistication. It's complicated. We need to think more. There are nuances. And yes, there are nuances. But sometimes nuance is just the mind's way of avoiding the clean truth. Now, here's the part that changes everything. These thieves are not enemies you destroy. They are parts you integrate. Because if you fight them with aggression, you recreate the same inner chaos, just in a different costume. Inner authority is not built by civil war. It's built by rightful hierarchy. The key move is recognition without obedience. You learn to say, "I see you." You learn to say, "Thank you for trying to protect me." And then you learn to say the line that ends the theft. "You may advise me, but you may not decide for me." In a mythic frame, this is the moment the rightful judge returns to the seat and the advisors are placed back in their proper roles. People-pleasing becomes a social awareness tool, not a steering wheel. Perfectionism becomes a quality check, not a prison. Trauma scripts become signals to slow down and support the body, not reasons to surrender your life to fear. Spiritual surrender becomes humility after decision, not an excuse before decision. But how do you actually do that in the moment, when the thief is persuasive and the pressure is real? You need a test. A simple, ruthless test that reveals who is in the chair. Here it is. After you make a choice, do you feel more whole or more split? Wholeness doesn't mean comfort. Sometimes the aligned choice is hard. Sometimes it makes you sweat. Sometimes it costs you. But even then, there's a quiet wholeness inside it, like your internal parts are marching in the same direction. Splitness feels like internal rebellion. It feels like one part of you nodding while another part is vomiting fear, resentment, or numbness. That splitness is often authority theft in action. And there's another test. Do you feel lighter in your spine or heavier in your throat? The spine is linked to the sense of uprightness, the feeling of being supported by your own structure. The throat is linked to suppression, to swallowing words, to holding back truth. When a decision steals your authority, the throat often tightens. When a decision restores your authority, the spine often feels subtly more stable, even if your stomach is nervous. These are not mystical claims. They're embodied signals. Your body is not always right about danger, but it is honest about ownership. Now we arrive at a darker truth, one the shadow thieves try to hide. Sometimes you benefit from doubting yourself, not because you enjoy suffering, but because doubt keeps you safe from consequences. If you doubt, you can avoid fully committing. If you avoid fully committing, you can avoid fully failing. You can avoid fully succeeding too, but the shadow doesn't mind that, because success also brings visibility, and visibility brings risk. This is why inner authority is an initiation. It requires giving up a certain kind of safety, the safety of being half in. Half in is the comfortable fog where no one can quite hold you accountable, including you. But half in is also where your life becomes soft around the edges, where your gifts never fully land, where your relationships never fully deepen, where your work never fully becomes yours. So what does Thoth's code demand here? It demands that you reclaim authorship with clean boundaries. And boundaries are not just external. They are internal. You set a boundary with the thieves. You tell them, "I will hear you, but I will not be ruled by you." And then you need a way to seal that boundary, because recognition alone isn't enough. In real life, under stress, the old patterns return. They return when you're tired. They return when someone pressures you. They return when uncertainty spikes. So you need protocol. You need a ritual structure, a repeatable method that turns authority into something you can enact, not just admire. In ancient terms, the temple didn't rely on moods. It relied on rites. A rite is a pattern that holds you steady when emotion sways. And the next threshold is exactly that, ritual protocols that seal a choice, so the inner court doesn't get dragged back in an endless litigation every time fear taps the window. Because a verdict without sealing is vulnerable. A verdict without sealing can be edited by a bad night of sleep, a single comment, a sudden doubt. But a sealed verdict becomes a pillar. And when your life has pillars, you can build. Because a verdict without sealing is vulnerable, you can feel how easily it gets edited by the smallest things. A bad night of sleep, a single raised eyebrow from someone you care about, one unexpected expense, one moment where the future looks too wide. And then the mind says, gently, maybe we should revisit. It says it with such civility that you almost don't notice what it's doing. It's not revisiting for wisdom. It's revisiting for relief. It's trying to reopen the case so it can put uncertainty back in the box where it belongs. In the old temple imagination, that is exactly why a seal existed. Not as decoration, but as law. Ink could be smeared, words could be argued, but a seal, pressed into wax with a signet, declared a transition had happened. The document was no longer a draft. It was a decree. Your psyche needs the same moment. Not because you are dramatic, but because you are human. You are made of layers, and those layers don't unify just because your rational mind reached a conclusion. They unify when the conclusion is embodied, named, and anchored in a way the nervous system can recognize. This is what most people misunderstand about commitment. They think commitment is an emotion like a surge of certainty that arrives and stays. But commitment is a protocol. It is something you do, and the more your life matters, the less you can rely on moods to hold your decisions together. So the first sealing protocol is not mystical at all. It's clarity in one sentence. Not a speech, not an explanation. A sentence that can survive pressure. When a decision is sealed, you can say it without bargaining. You can speak it and feel your body register the finality. I choose to leave. I choose to stay. I choose to build this. I choose to stop. I choose the path that aligns with my integrity. The exact words don't matter as much as the quality. It must be clean. If the sentence has too many conditions, it's not a verdict, it's a negotiation. And the way you know you've found the right sentence is subtle. It doesn't necessarily make you excited. It makes you still. It creates a quiet pause inside you, like the court has stopped murmuring. Now, the second protocol is what turns that sentence into something your nervous system believes. You bind it to the body. The mind can lie elegantly. The body lies less. The body will tell you whether you're sealing or performing. So you take the sentence and you speak it softly, and then you do the one thing most people avoid. You let the body feel what the sentence costs. Not in an exaggerated way, in a simple way. You stand up. You let your spine lengthen. You place both feet on the ground as if you're stepping into your own life. You breathe in slowly enough that your chest doesn't rush, and you breathe out long enough that your shoulders have to drop. And you repeat the sentence once more at the end of the exhale when the body is less reactive, when the nervous system is closer to neutral. This matters because the seal is not meant to be pressed while your fear is shouting. It's meant to be pressed while your system is as coherent as you can make it. A sealed decision often feels like two things at once: courage and grief. The courage to move forward and the grief of what you're not choosing. If you skip the grief will return as doubt. It will knock on your door disguised as, maybe we should reconsider, but it doesn't want reconsideration. It wants acknowledgement. So you let yourself feel the small mourning that comes with closing a door. You don't dramatize it. You simply allow it to be real. This is part of the seal. This is you telling the psyche, yes, something is being left behind, and I am still choosing. Then comes the third protocol, and this is where Thoth's scribe energy becomes unmistakable. You record the verdict. Not as a diary entry where you vent for 3 pages. As a record, a document of the inner court. You write the date. You write the decision sentence. You write the reason in 1 paragraph. Short, honest, not persuasive. And you write what would qualify as real new evidence that could reopen the case. This last part is crucial because it prevents panic from pretending to be wisdom. You are essentially telling your future self, if you want to reopen this decision, bring evidence, not mood. When you do this, the mind loses one of its favorite tricks. It can't claim, we never really decided. It can't insist the case is still pending. The record exists. Now you add the wax. Wax, in psychological terms, is the symbol that makes the record feel final. It could be an actual object if you like. People underestimate how powerful objects are. It could be a ring you touch when you commit, a coin you keep, a small stone, a particular pen you only use for decisions. It can also be a gesture, pressing your thumb to your sternum, or touching your wrist, or placing your palm over your abdomen. The gesture becomes a signet. Every time you do it, your nervous system learns This is the moment we stop negotiating. The point is not superstition. The point is conditioning. Your brain associates states with cues. If you choose a cue and use it consistently, you create a doorway. When the cue is activated, the state returns more easily. That's what rituals have always been, reliable doorways into inner states. Now, the fourth protocol is the one that makes the seal real in the world: immediate movement. Doubt thrives in delays. The longer you wait after deciding, the more space the thieves have to gather. People-pleasing starts rehearsing how to soften the decision. Perfectionism starts rewriting the plan. Trauma scripts start imagining disaster. So you take one action within a short window, something that cannot be undone without effort. Not a grand leap, but a real step. If you decided to leave, you set the meeting. If you decided to start, you make the first appointment, buy the domain, send the proposal, block the time, sign the form. If you decided to stop, you remove the access, delete the app, cancel the subscription, clear the drawer. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that reality now has evidence of your verdict. This is the strange mercy of action. It quiets the mind by giving it proof. The psyche believes what you repeatedly enact. Then you apply a boundary, and boundaries are the architecture of authority. You choose a period of time in which the decision is not revisited. Again, not as stubbornness, but as protection from compulsive relitigation. You are not forbidding wisdom. You are forbidding obsession. You tell yourself with calm precision, for the next 2 weeks, this decision stands. I will execute. I will gather feedback. I will not reopen the case unless real evidence appears. And if you must choose a longer period, you do. But the principle remains. A sealed choice needs a protected window where it can become real without constant inner sabotage. Inside that window, when doubt arises, and it will, you don't argue with it. You don't chase it. You don't obey it. You treat it like a witness trying to storm the bench after the verdict has been recorded. You acknowledge it without granting it power. You say, I hear you. You say the case is closed, and then you return to action. This might sound too simple, but simplicity is exactly what ends spirals. Spirals feed on engagement. If you engage, the spiral grows. If you acknowledge and redirect, the spiral stars. Now, there's another seal that many people avoid because it feels risky: the seal of witness. A decision becomes more stable when it is witnessed by another human being, not because you need permission, but because secrecy makes it easier to back out when fear rises. When you speak your verdict to someone trustworthy, you place it in the social world. You give your future self a mirror that can reflect your integrity back to you when you're tempted to disappear. This witness does not need to advise you. In fact, the best witness is someone who doesn't hijack your choice with their opinions. They simply hear you and say, I understand. That acknowledgement lands in the nervous system like a stamp. If you don't have that person, you can still create witness through structure. You can write the verdict and sign it. You can read it aloud into a recording you keep. The point is the same. You are making the decision a real event, not a private mood. And now, the last part of the protocol, the part that makes it feel almost sacred, is the closure ritual. Closure is how you teach the psyche that this is no longer an open loop. You close your eyes for a moment, and you imagine the inner court doors shutting. Not slamming, closing. You imagine the scribe setting down the pen. You imagine the seal cooling. And you let yourself say, one final time, the sentence of verdict. Then you do something small but definitive. You stand, you wash your hands, you step outside, you change rooms, you drink water, anything that marks transition. Your nervous system needs a physical marker that the debate is over and life is moving forward. If you do this consistently, you will notice something over time that feels almost like magic, but it's simply psychology plus discipline. Your decisions begin to feel heavier in the right way. Not burdensome, real. The mind starts learning that you don't make verdicts you don't intend to honor. And because of that, it begins to trust you. The inner thieves don't vanish, but they lose their authority. They learn that they can speak, but they cannot seize the chair. And as that trust grows, another shift occurs. You stop chasing certainty. You start building reliability. You start becoming the kind of person your own psyche can follow. And that is when the true test approaches. Not the test of making a decision, but the test of living inside it, while uncertainty, consequences, and other people's reactions crash against you like weather. Because a sealed choice is not the end. It is the beginning of a new identity, the one who honors their verdict. Because a sealed choice is not the end. It is the beginning of a new identity, the one who honors their verdict. And the moment you step out of the inner temple, the world does what the world always does. It tests what you claimed, not because the universe is cruel, but because reality is a pressure system. Whatever is true gets reinforced by friction. Whatever is performance gets exposed by friction. This is the final trial. Not making the decision, not writing it, not sealing it, but living inside it while uncertainty keeps moving around you like weather. At first, it can feel almost disappointing. You expect that once you commit, you'll feel a permanent calm. But what often comes is something more honest, a quieter mind paired with a louder life. The life you delayed begins to accelerate. Consequences begin to show themselves. People begin to respond. The future begins to unfold in imperfect, living detail. And the doubt loop, sensing that the old door is closing for real, tries one last trick. It doesn't shout anymore. It whispers. It whispers in the morning when you wake up and the room feels too quiet. It whispers after a conversation that didn't go as smoothly as you hoped. It whispers when you feel the first sting of loss, the first wave of loneliness, the first hint of regret. It says, see, this is why we shouldn't have decided. It tries to interpret normal difficulty as proof of failure. This is where inner authority becomes a craft instead of mood. Because you are not trying to eliminate doubt forever. You're learning how to hold doubt without obeying it. Think about that image again. The inner court doors closing, the seal cooling. The seal does not prevent weather from forming. It prevents weather from rewriting the decree. That is the difference. The first real test is uncertainty itself. The raw fact that you cannot know how everything will turn out. People who chronically doubt often believe their problem is decision-making, but their real discomfort is uncertainty tolerance. They feel uncertainty as personal threat. So when uncertainty rises, they reopen the case. They bargain. They revise. They run back toward the illusion of open options. In the trial, you practice a different move. You don't try to make uncertainty go away. You let it exist, and you keep moving anyway. This looks small from the outside. It looks like you continuing with the plan, even when you feel wobbly. It looks like you staying consistent for one more day. It looks like you refusing to turn a bad moment into a total reversal. But inside, it's enormous because your nervous system is learning a new rule. I can be unsure and still be sovereign. The second test is consequence. Not hypothetical consequences you imagined in the courtroom, but real consequences that arrive with their own texture. Maybe your choice cost you comfort. Maybe it cost you time. Maybe it cost you a relationship dynamic that was familiar. Maybe it cost you an identity you relied on, like being the agreeable one, the safe one, the one who never disappoints anyone. This is where many people panic, not because the decision was wrong, but because the cost is finally visible. Invisibility is what ends fantasies. In fantasy, the road looks clean. In real life, the road has gravel. It has fatigue. It has days when you wonder why you started. Authority is the ability to pay the cost without calling it a mistake. That doesn't mean you glorify suffering. It means you refuse to confuse cost with error. It means you remember what the seal was for, not to guarantee pleasure, but to guarantee ownership. Then comes the third test, often the sharpest, criticism. You can seal a decision in private and still be undone by one person's doubt. One raised eyebrow, one casual comment, one well-meaning question that lands like a hook in your ribs. Are you sure? Criticism activates old social wiring. The tribe, the need to belong, the fear of being cast out. And if you have a history where your choices weren't respected, criticism can feel like the return of a familiar judge, someone who always had the power to overrule you. In the final trial, you learn the difference between feedback and authority. Feedback is information. Authority is authorship. You can accept feedback without surrendering authority. That is not arrogance. That is maturity. So when criticism comes, you do something almost ceremonial inside yourself. You picture the court, and you picture the critic as a visitor. Visitors may speak. Visitors may offer testimony. But visitors do not sit on the bench. Your inner judge stays seated. You let the comment land, and you ask only one question. Does this contain real evidence that matters? If yes, you note it. If no, you let it pass through without turning it into a referendum on your entire life. This is the moment many people discover a painful truth. Some relationships were stable only when you were undecided, because indecision kept you pliable. It kept you available. It kept you easy to steer. So your authority will disturb certain dynamics, not as an attack, but as a fact. And the part of you that longs for harmony will beg you to soften, to backtrack, to make your decisions smaller so others feel more comfortable. This is where you remember what you're really protecting. You are protecting your integrity, which is the internal harmony that matters most. External harmony bought at the price of self-betrayal is not peace. It is anesthesia. Now, here is the subtlety that separates true inner authority from stubbornness. A sealed decision is not a prison. It is a verdict with conditions for revision. Revision is allowed when reality brings new evidence. Revision is not allowed when fear brings new fantasies. So in the final trial, you learn to distinguish an amendment from a betrayal. An amendment is when you keep the meaning of the decision and adjust the method. You chose to build, so you change the timeline. You chose to heal, so you change the therapist. You chose to leave, so you change the exit strategy. The direction stays intact. The tactics evolve. This is strength. Betrayal is when you reverse the decision not because evidence arrived, but because discomfort rose. Betrayal usually comes with rationalizations that sound wise, but feel hollow. You can tell because after you change your mind, you don't feel relief for long. You feel smaller. You feel like you've vanished a little. This distinction becomes your compass. And the more you practice it, the less you fear being wrong. Because inner authority is not the claim that you'll always be right. Inner authority is the claim that you will face reality honestly, and you will not abandon yourself in the process. Which brings us to the most humbling test of all. What happens when you truly made the wrong call? It happens. Even the best inner court cannot predict every variable. Sometimes you choose with integrity and later realize it doesn't fit. Sometimes you didn't have enough information. Sometimes your needs changed. Sometimes the world changed. A fragile ego panics here because being wrong feels like humiliation. So it either doubles down blindly or collapses into self-contempt. But in Thoth's code, being wrong is not a moral failure. It is a data point in the ledger. You reopen the case only the right way. Formally, with evidence. You don't whip yourself. You don't dramatize. You bring the new facts to the court. You weigh again. You render a new verdict. And because you do it with dignity, your self-trust grows rather than fractures. You prove to yourself that authority is not rigidity. Authority is honest stewardship. This is how a sovereign person navigates life. Not by clinging to every past decision, but by refusing to let fear run the process. They can pivot without collapsing. They can admit error without self-erasure. They can endure criticism without surrendering authorship. And somewhere along the way, a quieter miracle happens. Your mind begins to stop treating every decision as a referendum on your worth. You no longer need choices to prove you're good, lovable, smart, safe. You let decisions be what they are. Directional acts. You stop demanding that a single verdict solve your entire future, because you understand the deeper truth. The future is not one door. It is many rooms. Your authority isn't proven by one perfect choice. It is proven by the consistency with which you honor your own process. So you keep the ledger in a living way, not obsessively, not as self-surveillance, but as an anchor. You notice whether your actions match your decree. You notice whether your energy is aligned with your meaning. When you drift, you return. When you stumble, you correct. When you doubt, you consult the record instead of restarting the trial. And as you do this, the inner temple stops feeling like a distant myth. It becomes portable. It becomes something you carry. The court is no longer a place you visit only in crisis. It becomes the structure of your everyday self-respect. At some point, you realize you've been living differently for weeks. You've been moving more cleanly. You've been speaking with less apology. You've been tolerating uncertainty without panic. And then, one day, you notice the old doubt loop rise, and you watch it like weather passing over a mountain. It's there, but it no longer owns you. You don't chase it. You don't obey it. You let it move through, and you remain seated inside yourself. That is the final trial completed. Not the absence of doubt, but the presence of authority. Now, let the tempo slow, just enough to feel what you've built. You're not trying to become someone who never questions. You're becoming someone who questions in the right place at the right time with the right roles in the room. You are becoming someone who can hear fear without mistaking it for wisdom. Someone who can accept uncertainty without using it as an excuse to abandon their own life. So imagine, one last time, that inner hall, the scale at rest, the feather light, steady, uncompromising, the scribe's pen set down, not because the story is over, but because the verdict is clear enough to be lived. When you leave this narration and return to your day, you don't need a grand gesture. You need one clean act of loyalty to your own decree. One step that matches what you chose. And if doubt appears, let it appear. Let it speak. Then let it take its proper seat as a witness, not a ruler. Return to the record. Return to the body. Return to the sentence that made you still. Because the world will always offer noise. It will always offer opinions. It will always offer alternative doors. But your life is not built by how many doors you keep open. Your life is built by the doors you walk through with integrity and by the steadiness with which you keep walking when the hallway turns dark. Authority is not a performance of confidence. It is a devotion to alignment. And when you're devoted like that, a quiet kind of magnificence follows you. Not the loud magnificence of certainty, but the deep magnificence of being authored from within. If you stayed with me to the end, you're not here by accident. You're here because some part of you is done negotiating your life away. So let's seal this the way Thoth would, with a clear verdict and a record that can't be rewritten by a restless night. Drop a comment below with this exact phrase. The verdict stands. Let it be your inner seal, your public witness, that from this moment on, doubt may testify, but it will not rule.